Feel it, wanna feel it.
When India gained independence in 1947, some groups desired their own nation, leading to the creation of Pakistan. World War II had just ended, leaving the UK weakened and less focused on its empire. However, India's independence was also due to other factors, including the efforts of Indian freedom fighters. Shortly after India and Pakistan became separate countries in the same year, another conflict began. This time between the two new superpowers, the USA and Russia. The Cold War was a clash between capitalism and communism. Both superpowers collected nuclear weapons, leading to the idea of mutually assured destruction. Important elements of this conflict included the space race, proxy wars, espionage, and the Iron Curtain. The United States worried that communist revolutions would take over third world countries, so they promoted democracy and capitalism. India and Pakistan, two large, poor, and densely populated countries in Asia, had just gained their independence. The US had interests in aligning with both nations as they were democracies, and did not want them to turn towards communism. However, relations between India and Pakistan were worsening. Pakistan tried to capture the Kashmir region by force, but India stopped them midway and prevented Kashmir from falling entirely into Pakistan's hands. Both countries had the option of choosing to ally with either the USSR or the US. Given its adversarial relations with India since 1947, Pakistan sought a powerful ally to counterbalance India's military strength. India, on the other hand, chose not to join either group, as doing so would compromise its sovereignty in foreign affairs, making the freedom struggle seem pointless. Instead, India initiated the idea of non-alignment. The non-aligned movement is a forum of 120 countries, not formally aligned with any major power bloc. It was founded to advance the interests of developing countries during the Cold War. This was a sensible decision for India, which had just gained independence, and needed to focus on its people's interests rather than getting involved in conflicts. However, this decision irked the United States, as India's non-alignment made it an unreliable partner in the American geopolitical strategy. India was a leading voice in the non-aligned movement, which included many newly independent nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The US feared that India's influence could lead these countries to adopt neutral or even anti-Western stances, reducing American influence in the Third World. The US aimed to build a network of military alliances around the world to contain Soviet expansion. However, India's non-alignment meant it did not participate in these alliances, which was seen as a missed opportunity for strengthening collective security against the Soviet Union. India's criticism of the British, French, and Israeli invasion of Egypt, and its support for Egypt's nationalization of the Suez Canal, aligned more with Soviet and non-aligned views than those of the Western Bloc. There are reports that the US even provided some assistance to India during its conflict with China, but India's broader strategic alignment remained non-aligned. The US viewed this as an inconsistent stance. Pakistan, on the other hand, signaled its willingness to ally with the US, seeking American assistance on the Kashmir issue. The US saw value in forming an alliance with Pakistan due to its strategic location bordering Afghanistan, Iran, and China, countries the US aimed to engage positively. Additionally, the US was keen on monitoring India, which had adopted a new ideology. These factors led to Pakistan becoming a US ally. In exchange for this alliance, Pakistan received substantial military and economic aid from the United States, which enhanced its military capabilities and boosted its economy. Pakistan also joined US-led military alliances, such as the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization in 1954 and the Central Treaty Organization in 1955. On the other hand, India's non-aligned policy did not significantly disturb the Soviets. In fact, the non-aligned movement appealed to the Soviet Union because it allowed them to extend their influence in the developing world without direct confrontation with the West. India wielded substantial influence over neighboring regions like South Asia and the Middle East, making a strong partnership with India beneficial for the USSR's geopolitical interests in those areas. However, Joseph Stalin held a negative view of India and its leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian National Congress, and Jawaharlal Nehru, whom he saw as instruments of British and monopoly capitalism. Despite this, the Soviets did not consider India as their enemy, as demonstrated in 1951 when the USSR used its veto power in support of India during the Kashmir dispute. This action served to strengthen relations between India and the Soviet Union. Following Stalin's death in 1953, relations between India and the Soviet Union warmed significantly, with close cooperation between the two nations. The Soviets successfully cultivated closer ties with countries in the non-aligned movement, particularly India. When Nikita Khrushchev visited India, he publicly declared Soviet support for Indian sovereignty over disputed territories like Kashmir and Portuguese coastal enclaves such as Goa. Throughout the 1950s, the Soviet Union provided substantial assistance and technology transfer across various industrial sectors to India, including steel, defense, railways, construction equipment, mining, and petrochemicals. By 1960, India had received more Soviet assistance than China. During the Indo-Pakistani War in 1965, the Soviet Union played a crucial role in brokering peace between India and Pakistan. Moreover, in the Sino-Indian War of 1962, the Soviet Union declared its neutrality, refusing to support China, which caused strong objections from the Chinese. In 1962, the Soviet Union agreed to transfer technology to India for co-producing the McCoy and Gurevich MiG-21 jet fighter, a technology it had earlier denied to China. This disparity became another point of contention in Sino-Soviet relations. After the Chinese Communist Party emerged victorious in the Chinese Civil War of 1949, China and the Soviet Union initially formed a strong alliance based on their shared communist ideologies. However, differences soon emerged. The Soviet Union, under Stalin's leadership, adhered strictly to Marxism-Leninism, focusing on heavy industrialization and centralized control. In contrast, China, led by Mao Zedong, adapted Marxism to suit its agrarian society, emphasizing the role of rural peasantry as the revolutionary force. Following Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev took over leadership in the Soviet Union and initiated de-Stalinization, criticizing Stalin's rule. This move was viewed by Mao as a challenge to his own authority. Khrushchev's policies advocating peaceful coexistence with the West were seen by Mao as a betrayal of communist principles, as Mao believed in perpetual revolution and maintaining conflict with capitalist nations. These ideological and political differences escalated throughout the 1960s, leading to a breakdown in Sino-Soviet relations and ushering in a period of hostility between the two communist giants. Both China and the Soviet Union aimed to lead the global communist movement, but China sought to assert its independence and leadership, challenging Soviet dominance. This rivalry led to military clashes in the late 1960s, particularly the Ussuri River skirmishes in 1969, which brought these two communist giants close to war. The Sino-Soviet split posed a significant threat to China from the Soviet Union. Despite China's anti-capitalist stance, it sought to improve relations with the United States to counterbalance this threat, much like Pakistan's strategy. Pakistan acted as a mediator between the US and China, establishing a secret communication channel for discreet exchanges between the two nations. In 1971, China extended an invitation to the US table tennis team, a gesture that helped thaw relations and paved the way for high-level diplomatic talks. The 1970s were a challenging decade that tested the alliances of both Pakistan and India. In the 1970s, Pakistan initiated a brutal genocide in East Pakistan, disregarding democratic principles, which resulted in millions of refugees pouring into India. India, still grappling with economic challenges, struggled to bear the burden of these refugees. In response, India trained and armed Bangladeshis to resist the oppressive Pakistani military. Pakistan, expecting support from the United States, opened a two-front war against India. Despite awareness of the Pakistani military's actions in East Pakistan, the US turned a blind eye and provided arms to Pakistan. Additionally, the US dispatched a carrier battle group to the Indian Ocean, seemingly to intimidate India and even encouraged China to escalate tensions with them. India had only one aircraft carrier, insufficient to counter a nuclear carrier with over 70 aircraft. There are unconfirmed reports suggesting that India may have considered a kamikaze attack on the US aircraft carriers, akin to Japanese tactics during World War II. The truth of these reports may be debated, but regardless, India was undeterred in carrying out its operations on both the Western and Eastern fronts in 1971. During this time, India signed a treaty of friendship and cooperation with the Soviet Union. When the US deployed its 7th Fleet and the UK sent HMS Eagle, the Soviet Union responded by sending its Vladivostok Fleet, which included nuclear submarines and ships, successfully pushing the American and British forces away. With India blockading Pakistan at sea, Pakistan had few options left. Ultimately, in December, India ensured the victory of the secessionists and the establishment of the new state of Bangladesh. The outcome was not just a military defeat for Pakistan, but also a moral one from which Pakistan never fully recovered. Despite Pakistan's economic successes in the 1960s, aided significantly by the United States through economic aid, military assistance, and development programs, these efforts did little to stabilize the country's political structure. Pakistan's ethnic diversity and regional disparities have fueled separatist movements and internal conflicts, weakening national unity. Widespread corruption within the political establishment has further eroded public trust and hindered effective governance, while a weak judiciary has struggled to uphold the rule of law. Religious extremism and militant groups have posed significant security challenges and further destabilized Pakistan's political landscape. The country's reliance on foreign aid, including from the US, has sometimes led to external interference in domestic affairs, complicating political dynamics. However, the most critical issue is the military's frequent intervention in politics, resulting in numerous coups and prolonged periods of military rule, which have undermined democratic institutions. To this day, no elected Prime Minister of Pakistan has completed a full term in office. Pakistan is known as one of the most anti-American countries globally and has been accused of covertly sponsoring terrorism. Despite this, the US provided aid to Pakistan, even during periods of military dictatorship, and designated Pakistan as a major non-NATO ally. Politically and economically, it teeters on the brink of being a failed state. However, despite receiving billions of dollars in aid from US taxpayers to combat al-Qaeda, Pakistan harbored Osama bin Laden for years, and it was discovered that elements within its military were complicit in this. This revelation was seen as a betrayal by many in the US, as there were indications and signals that Pakistan was not fully committed to combating terrorism. Nevertheless, the US continued to provide military assistance to Pakistan, driven by its geopolitical interests, which persist to this day. Today, India shares American interests. Since opening its economy in 1991, India has emerged as a thriving economic powerhouse, possessing substantial military strength and maintaining a democratic system. Contrary to fears in the US, India was not pushed by the Soviet Union to adopt communism or completely abandon capitalism. While socialist and Marxist ideas influenced Indian intellectuals, politicians, and policies such as land reforms and state control of key industries, India retained its commitment to democracy and pursued a mixed economy. Currently, India stands at a juncture where it can maintain friendly relations with both Russia and the US, while pursuing its own national interests independently. In short, India has become the state that the US tried to create in Pakistan.